as they were leaving, they took a male arrowhead and a female arrow point, and they made a line across the path that they had all exited. And they made that line, as the way they told me in the language of our people. Okay, we make this line with the male and the female arrow point. Our people should never ever cross to go back into this area where our people were held. Is a word that would say probably the place of suffering, the place of death, the place of evil, a place where you could even call it hell. Our people, the old people, talk about the time when they were rounded up by the military around the 1862. And so all around the Neta, there was a lot of our people that were being constantly pursued by the military. Under the direction of Kit Carson, they were doing the Scorched Earth campaign, where they had burned all their homes, their fields, their orchards. They had killed all of the livestock of the Neh. And so they were running constantly. And the people were starving, and they were exposed to the elements, cold. And of course, their clothing and that was all in tatters. And so it was a very difficult time for our people. I had a great uncle who lived to be 117 years old, and I shared a sweat lodge with him probably around the 1971, I think was the last time that I was able to be with him. But it was just him and I in the sweat lodge. And I happened to ask him if he knew of any details in that of our people when they were forced to march from Fort Defiance and Fort Wingate and come east. And they came to this area, is what he told me. And behind me, of course, you can see the Sandia Mountains across the Rio Grande here. But he told me that after they had been rounded up and were being moved from Fort Wingate, coming out to this direction, that they crossed the Rio Grande and then made their way to the Sandia Mountain here, to the north end of the mountain. And then they crossed over to the other side, and then they went out to the Fort Sumner. Puerte is what our people call it. But there were several groups in that had to be made to march to that direction. And so this is not the only route. Supposedly there was other routes in that were taken, but the most common one was the one that's on the north face of the Sandia Mountain after crossing the Rio Grande. But our people were held in captivity at Fort Sumner for 4 years, basically, from 1864 to 1868. And this is a time when place that the Neh had occupied all the way up to present-day Grand Junction, and then over to what is now present-day Gunnison Valley, and all the way out to the Sacred Mountain, the Mount Blanca, and then of course all the way down south towards the present-day Taos, New Mexico, and Santa Fe, and all the areas coming south. And that would be the eastern boundaries of what the Neh would call the Netra. And then of course going to the west, it would be all the way out to the coast. But you have to know that the Neh had experienced pandemic of disease and that, and viruses and that were brought in by the Europeans. And so our people were reduced in great numbers sometime around 1580, 1585, from the great numbers that they were previous to that. And so by the time that they were being rounded up, there were not that many Neh really, but they were still resisting the military. Now, the Neh are basically a peaceful people, and the problem began, of course, even after 1520, when the Spaniards came up to this part of the continent, and the Neh gave opposition to the Spaniards in their exploration and that into the land areas and that the Neh and other people had occupied. And it was basically the Neh that kept the Spaniards out of the southwest. And through negotiation, there was only a few places in that the Dene would allow the Spaniards to maintain and establish settlements. And one of those places was Santa Fe, and of course Albuquerque, and then further down it would be El Paso. So even today, if you look at a map, you'll notice that there are just these Spanish settlements along the Rio Grande to the east of the Neta, and then to the west. Of course, you can only see San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. These were all the Spanish settlements on that were pretty much allowed to remain. They were small settlements in those days, but down through the years, of course, it has expanded and grown quite a lot. But our Dene allowed that. It's not recorded in history that Father Escalante and his group that went across to the middle of the Neta to San Francisco and out in the coastal areas to the west. But when the Dene finally gave opposition to the American settlers, it was because of the mining operations and that they began in such places as present-day Grants, New Mexico, and then up to the north toward what is present-day Durango and Telluride and those areas as well. And so when the settlers came in, it was the Dene that gave opposition to the settlers and that. And so when they were finally rounded up, it left the places that they had occupied vacant. And when the Dene were held in captivity, various groups of people saw the lands in that the Dene had been removed from, such areas as the places north of what is now the Cortez, Colorado, all the way up into Grand Junction. And they discovered that there was silver and gold up into those areas. And so it became a land area in that was taken over by the American settlers. And this all took place after the Dene had been removed and were being held in captivity at Fort Sumner. And while the Dene were at Fort Sumner, many of them perished because of the various disease and that, and the lack of food and nutrition. The only food that was made available to them was probably foods like rice and beans, coffee, flour, and pork. And that was the food ration, basically. In order to get food, some of the young women would do special favors and sexual favors and that to the military people that were there. And they, of course, developed the sexual diseases and that of syphilis and so on. And that was a bad experience for many of the people that died, and various other forms of disease and that they died from. So several thousand of the Dene perished and died while they were being held captive. And so the time came after 4 years to sign the peace treaty, and that they would be allowed to return to the portion of their homeland. And so the treaty was signed in June. It was finally ratified in Congress on August the 12th. And then they were allowed to return home. And so when the time came when our people were walking away, the last of the group was walking away from the place where they had been in prison for 4 years. 4 digit is what they say of the last of the group. As they were leaving, they took a male arrowhead and a female arrow point, and they made a line across the path that they had all exited as they came back west. And they made that line, as the way they told me in the language of our people. Besus, okay, bakaiki to pa atiki be etatazo. Kodo e yadi to the neta kun ando data. So that to kon nado data. Di kon edi ta holiedo le is what they said. And so the translation basically is that we make this line with the male and the female arrow point, and this line is going to be the place where our people should never ever cross to go back into this area where our people were held. Chidita is a word that would say probably the place of suffering, the place of death, the place of evil, a place where you could even call it hell. They said they will never return to this place. And they sang the Achasan, which is the Protection Way song. And they made the prayer offering. Achasodazin. The protection prayer and the protection song were made as they made those lines. And as I was told this by the old people, they said, you know, Daneshi, Doshi, the Haptadiana, some of the old people had heard that some of our people had gone back over to Huelte and had gone over there to do something. But they said they were being very disrespectful on going back and crossing a line and that our people had made, that had said, you know, was what they had said. And so those are the things that a lot of the older people had told me. And many of them cried when they talked about the time that our people were walking around in tattered clothes and suffering from the elements, the cold, and no food. And they were being constantly pursued by the military to be rounded up and then finally to be put in captivity and subjected to all kinds of suffering, and that for 4 years. I've had it described to me, and as I said, you know, they cried when they told me these stories of what they had experienced. And these are our old people, and we should respect them. And we should respect them by the way that we live, the lives that we live, and the experiences that we have even in the present day. And it is something to be remembered, something to respect our people for the things that they experience, and to really learn how we can apply that to our lives today to live as the Neh. When I got my census number, I had about 160,000 Neh. But today the census count is up to about 370,000 Neh. And that's a lot of people. Our people have to try to live in a society where so many things we are adopting that are not good for our people. And it is that we are forgetting the old people and how they suffered and the things that they experienced. And so I share with you some of the things that we've been told.